And we are live with Jeanne Allen, the CEO, founder, and ed maven of the Center for Education Reform, nationally known and celebrated organization that is still holding the torch for school reform fearlessly, and not halfway school choice, what I call the halfway school choice people who are for this one kind of school choice or another, but not for all of it. So, Jeanne, you are definitely amongst the tallest of the real fighters when it comes to school choice. So thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Appreciate it. A lot to learn from you. But there's two questions I want to start with. You know, the one that I was going to start with was really about where are we now? And, you know, is school choice dead in the water, or is it more viable than ever given COVID? But I just want to back all the way up for a second and just ask you, why school choice? Like, why you could have dedicated your life to the Museum of Italian History. You could have, you know, dedicated your life to anything else, campaigns, political campaigns, but it's school choice. Why?
Because I saw the inequities really, really young in education. And even though I was raised with Italian immigrant father, for whom education for us, as it was for him, was the great equalizer. And my education was okay. They did a great job considering where they came from. And then when I grew up and I saw that lots and lots of other people didn't have anything compared to what I had, and I thought mine was mediocre, it really upset me. And then I realized that people like even my parents and others didn't know that. And so I was kind of shocked that there was this world going on outside of where I was that I didn't know about. And I was like, why doesn't everybody know that there's inequities? Why doesn't everybody know? And, you know, my parents moved to a middle-class suburb in New Jersey to educate me. And when I started doing this work, and I'd go on TV and I'd rail about, or like write, and I'm a little TV, like not a big deal. And I'd write about whatever, and I'd rail on education. They'd be like, what are you talking about? You went to great public school. Why are you criticizing it? We risked everything for you. And I'd be like, no, actually, it wasn't that great, Mom.
So you went, immigrant parents, but you went to public schools, traditional public schools. You didn't go to Catholic schools or something like that. No. And they did what a lot of people do in the United States, which is move to where the schools are good, or safe.
Right.
And you were more interested in the fact that not everybody can do that.
Yeah, I was really shocked when I found that out. First, I was shocked when I went to college, and I saw these people who went to schools like called the Friends School. All these like really high elite schools, and they were more than me. And I was like, or more than I, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I met people in like the town where I lived that were the workers, and they didn't have any of that. And nobody was bothered about it. And that bothered me.
Do you think it's gotten better in terms of what families have options to between the time that you started and now?
I do think it's gotten better. I think it's modestly better. I think the knowledge of what's out there is modestly better. I think technology has a lot to do with that because you can see it. We used to have to rely only on what you read in the paper or TV, or, you know, one by one neighborhood chatter. But now at least we have access to each other, and we can see that there's people out there talking about stuff that we wouldn't have been exposed to.
Do you think the politics have gotten any easier?
I think the politics are as difficult, but different. I think the politics originally were more about apathy. Then they transitioned from the opponents, like, ooh, wait, there's a bunch of people out there. I mean, apathy meaning a lot of people didn't know what they didn't know. So you can't really build a movement if you're talking to people who don't know a lot about what they don't know. And then all of a sudden, when it started to kind of grow and like charter schools and laws got adopted, and then all of a sudden the unions and school boards associations were very upset. Like, oh, wait a minute, they're taking our clients. They're taking our partnership. Then it got really ugly. Then it got partisan. So the partisanship didn't start early, right? It was really the blob, as we like to make fun of them, call them. And then it was like, oh, wait, we're going to go make sure there's a political party who's voicing support for us.
In the beginning, you saw it as more bipartisan, like school choice part, not just the charter part, because the charter part seems to really have been bipartisan, potentially because it kept money within the old system. It didn't completely leave, but
Right.
in something like vouchers, you saw it as more bipartisan at one point in time.
Oh, absolutely. The great strange bedfellows. I mean, the Democratic leader in New Jersey who broke bread with the Republican governor, the Republican governor of Pennsylvania with now Congressman, then State Rep Dwight Evans. I mean, every state has that yin and yang who were like awesome together. The longshoremen, union leaders in Philly.
What?
Oh yeah, they were supporting in 1991. They were supporting school choice. I'm not that old. I watched it from a really far away.
Wow, that is a story that doesn't get told.
No, it doesn't. It's like everybody knows about. A lot of people know about Paula Williams, not as many, but
Yeah.
no. And that's why when people say things today like, "Oh my gosh, it's." We have to be careful not to upset people because we really got to make sure the Democrats come on board. I'm like, wait, the Democrats were on board. That came from Democrats. I mean, I grew up with these people. I know what they think. They were concerned about their kids getting to school first and foremost. So they weren't hard to get. It was just when the political parties at the national level began to put their sort of anchor, in the water, then they're like, "Ooh, wait, we can't get out. We already said goodbye with those people. It's really hard to pull." Right.
You think you just mentioned longshoremen. I live in a rural area that is pretty Democratic, but I live in what was Michelle Bachmann's district. And it's a different kind of Democrat. Like these are trade workers. These are not like city Democrats or Democrats that you have in the Twin Cities. It's a little bit different here. Do you think maybe when you're thinking back to 91, late 80s, that you had a different type of Democrat in office? Was like the national leadership more like what I have here locally and not as, metropolitan?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right, Chris, that I think, again, as information and technology and everyone's an expert and 24/7, access to news has grown. People have become more strident in their politics. You didn't used to go into whether you were a Girl Scout or you went to church or whatever. You didn't walk in your community and go, "That guy's a Republican, that guy's a Democrat." Now you're almost like, "Ooh, what is he? What do they think about that?" And it's very different. So it was always hard to convince people to do something that was very opposite the status quo. But it wasn't as hard because they were one party or the other, because there was always someone's relatively courageous, like, "Yeah, that makes sense. I want to do that for my community."
Well, it feels like definitely we're not there anymore. The story gets retold, and we have a comment here from Stephanie Hope that kind of characterizes a little bit of what the pushback is now. Stephanie says, "School choice is a lie. Can I use my voucher at any school I want to, fund all schools equally, and stop with de facto segregation?" There's so much in that comment. So much to address. So the first part is school choice is a lie. And I imagine it's school choice is a lie because the second part of the comment here, which is the idea that you can't use your voucher everywhere. Not everybody gets an equal voucher, for one. And then even when you do get the voucher, there are certain schools, this is what's popping up all over it, that still can tell you, no, you can't come in for different reasons. How do you address that?
Yeah, and I think there's another underlying piece that may or may not be behind what Stephanie's saying, but I also really don't like the term school choice anymore. And it's not because I want to market it differently, and language evolves. But a lot of people look at school choice as the school is choosing, right? And part of the reason Stephanie and people like Stephanie around the country are concerned, Chris, is because it's not equal monies. So we've always said, and in fact, there was a big, anti-choice movie written about this a few years ago. We've always said there should be a backpack full of cash that's equal in amount to everyone.
You got in trouble for saying that before, right? You're going to say it here again.
I'm saying it again because it doesn't mean profit. It means you literally are as important as I am and as the next person is. And a school's going to come up and say to Stephanie, I'm going to vie for the opportunity to educate your child. Because once all that money is equal, those schools will be jumping out of their, feet, chairs, schools to bring you to them because they want the opportunity and they want that money to follow kids. And so it's not equal now because we only got a little choice here, a little choice there. So what happens? People who have money make choices.
I believe so. My good friends at EdChoice publish a grid that shows you all the different choice programs across the country. I think I counted 40 or 44 in 12 states. But they all do have a particular thing, right? So like there's some for dyslexia, or there's some for hard of hearing and, or hearing impaired. Florida has one, I think, recently that was floated. I don't know if it passed or not, around kids that are bullied. But they're not universal, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make here. So not everybody gets the benefit from them. And maybe that causes, I don't know. Do you think it would be easier if we pushed for them to be universal and for them to be equal to the amount that you get when you go to a regular district school?
Yeah, and I think there's another piece of it though. It's where I'm a little bit on the fence about a universal. Is I want money. First of all, I want money to move with students. I want money to leave a system if I'm leaving a system, not stay there. Right? So when Milwaukee was first passed, I don't know what it's up to. Maybe it's up to 6,000, but it was like you get half of what the public schools get. So your kid's worth half, right? Like I can't speak to the experience of Black people, but I can't imagine like having that conversation. Like you're worth half. Like where is that, right? And so
three-fourths a person or 3/5 a person.
Right. So it's kind of the same thing. And we go like, oh, that's okay. We want it. Or like I take a $200 tax credit, or I'll take it for special needs. And I get it because I like a little of a loaf rather than the whole loaf if I can get it. So, but by doing that, we reinforce the idea that that's choice, and that's not really power. It's not. It may be it may contribute a choice, but it's not pure power. My problem with universal or complete ESAs is I don't think until we get there where everyone is really choosing, it's hard to get everyone choosing and make that equal and make schools better as a result.
That's really profound, this last part that you said. So I've been floating this idea, just randomly came up, and you're going to tell me that someone already has floated this idea, of course, because everything I think of, I think I thought of it. So instead of a per pupil income or an ESA, just to have something like an individual learning allotment, meaning whatever the per pupil is in that state, you get that as a parent. So I have, right now I have 3 kids in traditional public schools. I think our state spends like 16, whatever. So this would amount to like 48 grand in cash that I would have each year to play with to educate 3 kids. And I would do what you just said earlier. I'd be able to go to the marketplace wherever they go. They'd have a backpack. That's not an insignificant amount of money either, right? Like almost 50K. If my math is right, if my Common Core math is right, I think that's about right. What would be wrong with that? What would be wrong with just parents it's an allotment. It's no longer a subsidy to a building or to a district. It's a straight subsidy to parents.
There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's what we do in higher ed. Right? Not completely across the board, but on an income base, and even not so much on income base, you can get money and go to a school of your choice, or you can use that money. So you could do 4 years, you could do 2 years, you can buy a certificate program as long as it's accredited. That's a whole nother story. It's a lot more like higher ed, I should say. It's not exactly like higher ed. And in fact, I don't know if you want to go there, but if we had that the way in this situation, we wouldn't have parents scrambling to figure out, how do I get a device? How do I go? Granted, there's lots that's free. We're promoting on our website. There's a zillion websites promoting it. It's like resource infobesity, right now.
Wow. Yeah.
But the reality is, if I had that money, if I had that 10, 12, 15 grand, and I could say, okay, the school doesn't have it right now, or I haven't spent it all, I want to make sure that my daughter or my son has these resources while I'm going through this pandemic, or maybe when my family's going through an issue, or maybe I had to move in the middle of nowhere. I don't like the schools, or maybe my daughter decided to go, like, I don't know, do soccer or something that doesn't allow her to go to school. In other words, what we're seeing today is showing us the deficiency in having a one size fits all system when maybe your child is at home and they need something completely different than even what a remote digital learning program looks like.
Wow. You know, someone here, Tilly Elvram, said, no one knows the history of school choice like Jeanne Allen.
Thanks, Tilly.
Which is awesome. So relating back to Stephanie's quote about de facto segregation, the national pushback on school choice, there's been so many different narratives that have been marketed as pushback to school choice to keep everybody in the traditional system and scared of anything else. But one of the pieces of pushback is that it has a history rooted in segregation. It's what segregationists, for instance, in Mississippi did when they didn't want to integrate schools. So they started segregation academies. They got public money to be able to go to what were basically private academies. But when we think about the history of school choice, where do you start? Like, what's your location, the starting point? Is it Mississippi in the 50s? Is it Milwaukee in the 80s? Is it Maine in 18 whatever? Like, I don't know how Maine's program is like forever old, right?
Something, right.
Where do you start it?
Tuitioning out. I started in the 80s because the 80s is significant in that, yes, understand all that went before and led up to the creation of this large system that was rule driven because we were trying to protect people from capricious and arbitrary habits and rituals that school districts were doing. And part of those rituals were exactly what you described, Chris, that segregation. But then we got like 15, 20 years ahead. We had all these bigger systems, lots of different money pods coming from different places with strings attached, right? And then we looked around and said, oops, this is not really working. You know, 1983 was that pivotal moment. It was a nation at risk. There was data. It was the first time actually we took a snapshot of how schools were doing around the country. And it turns out not only were our urban areas just pathetically educated, failing miserably, but even middle and upper middle class kids, more advantaged kids, so rural kids were not getting the education they deserved. And you looked around and you go, oh my gosh, we've actually segregated schools again. People didn't think that way because of housing patterns. I mean, you can go on forever, right? You know all this really well, better than I do. But we went and said it's by going to school based on zip code. Turns out doesn't become equitable, fair, or even excellent if you have no choice in whether or not that school works for your kid. So I think that was the turning point, and that was the beginning of options. That was dropouts out of Minnesota, and let's try to give dropouts a chance to go back. And what did we learn? Oh, if kids have choices, they pick schools that better meet their needs, even kids themselves, even today. Right?
I do want to say that I think Minnesota has led the nation in creative choice options and the ability to, like, Rudy Perpich and others, I think did some good work before charter schools even, you know, like with open enrollment and different ways to get to where you want to go. It's interesting what you just said, because what you just said sounds like it was the birth of the modern school choice movement. Right. So like when people like to locate school choice in the segregation academies, they're making a choice to locate it there on purpose. It's a strategic choice to say, out of all the history, I'm going to start here because it's the most impactful to hurt school choice advocates. I want to stick with that for a second, though, Jeannie, because why everything you have said to me so far is about the best interest of the family, the child, helping people, parents, get what they need for their kids. But that's not the way it's portrayed. And that's not the way you're portrayed in your pursuit of this, right? And you've probably heard it all. I'm sure you have. Like, you know, you've been in this longer than I have. I've heard it all. My motives questioned, it's all about funding. Somebody created me in a lab somewhere and, put a brain in me. And, I was the Tin Man before. I didn't have a heart, and I was the Scarecrow. I didn't have a brain, but, the Waltons got together and said, we must build a Negro. And, they put me together. It's super insulting it's super insulting as something you have to face when you're just trying to advocate for families. But I don't get what you probably get, which yours is more that you're racist. You're really pushing segregation on purpose. How do you answer that? I mean, and what do you feel about that?
Yeah, and I'm white and I'm wealthy, even though I've actually worked for everything I've ever had, and came from, I won't say poverty, but came from lesser means.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's ignorance, and I think it's intentional. I think it's both, right? And so, it doesn't there's that great cartoon I have on my refrigerator that says, you can't scare me, I have children. Life is hard, and this is a hard thing to do. I mean, my favorite it was the first time actually years and years ago, there was a woman, you may not remember her, but she was the poster child for everything bad with the popular television church people. Her name was Tammy Faye Baker.
Oh, I remember Tammy Faye Baker. Yes.
So the unions did a caricature of me as Tammy Faye Baker. Education reform.
Yeah. I
was there looking for, just to preying on people because I wanted somehow them to, pay me. It was very, very odd. So look, I think there's two things to do. There's the great news that I've learned is the vast majority of people only buy that or listen to it because we weren't there first. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And they don't know. They just know what they know from leaders that teach them things or say, oh, those people are bad, or they're not in what you're doing. And so one of the reasons I also hate the term of school choice is every time I speak to somebody at a local level in a school, it could be a teacher in Baltimore, it could be a parent I've never met. This happened to me over the holidays. I met a woman who was a parent who said school choice was when the districts send their bad kids to her school. And then I had this conversation with one person all evening at this lovely party. And my husband's like, what are you doing? Can you talk to anyone else? I'm like, no, because I just realized that no one ever told her or shared with her the other way around. And so we can't go retail across 50 million people, but we can go as close as we can and educate and re-educate. And I think that's what is incumbent upon us. There's a lot easier things to do. You're absolutely right, Chris. And I don't wake up infrequently and say, isn't there something else I should and could be doing? So I don't have to be spending my time saying the same thing over and over again. But it's important. And that's how movements. And I look at people like Howard Fuller and Kevin and others, and I go, they did it. So what's wrong with me?
Well, this is really important because we need a new generation of people doing it, though. I mean, and this is what's so important about, I think, your example is you haven't fatigued. This can easily burn somebody out. You can have somebody who does this for 3 or 4 or 5 years and eventually says, listen, it'd just be easier if I just went and been, if I can go be an accountant at Accenture or get some sort of job at, Bain or something like that. This, life would be easier. Why would I keep doing this? But you've kept doing it. You didn't fatigue from it, which is a good example. But I think we might be losing the next wave of people to understand. Well, let me take that back and I'll ask you about it. In some ways, it feels like the Bernieisms in the Bernie crowd are winning a little bit on narrative with some of the younger folks who don't have kids yet. But I do believe that millennial parents and Generation Z parents are so specialized in everything else in their life that they're going to want choices even in how they educate their kid, right?
Right.
Do you think that? Do you see that as the direction that we're going?
Yeah, and there's, we did some data polling years and years ago, and I think it still applies, which is people between, say, 25 and 45, even those not yet with kids, are kind of pregnant in their head before they even are dating, right? In other words, they're already thinking about their choices. Where do I want to live? What kind of children, what kind of experience do I want to give my kids? So they want to show up somewhere and know that they can give those experiences. But I think part of this is our fault, right? And so the succession planning, if you will, is our fault in these two ways. One is we wanted to make this really, we wanted to make this appealing to people to join the cause. And so we have a lot of people out there that are tremendously smart and thoughtful and running great organizations. And they don't call me anymore because I say things like this. Essentially, they would rather be friends than win. I'd rather win. I'd rather win.
You mean they're too busy trying to find common ground with people that hate them?
Yes. And by the way, if common ground results in the outcome, great. But if it results, we will come back a couple of years from now. Like we don't have a couple of years. But the other thing I think is our fault is, again, I'm going to go back to the issue in the language. School choice is really not about a choice. It's about what we're seeing right now across the country. It is, my child is, sitting. I have adult kids, so I'm not seeing this, although I would say that the kids that I raised with structure are handling this pandemic a lot better than the other two who I didn't raise with structure, okay? And so what we're seeing is, like, people are actually realizing their kids learn differently. They don't know what's happening in schools most of the time. They don't have the luxury of asking that because guess what? They don't have the option. So the option and the opportunity and the choice, if you will, is an education tool. And so now people are like, wait, I didn't know that's what you did in math, or I didn't realize you were that good in reading, honey, or I didn't realize you didn't know how to sit at a desk and learn by yourself for an hour, right? All of those things are part of the learning process. And I think parents today must be going, holy cow, what is going on here? I want to know more and I want to be part of this. And so choice can drive a better learning experience because it makes the parent more informed. And we have shut parents out from the process by saying, drop them off. We don't need to tell you anything. Just sign this paper, show up when we tell you, and you're done. And that doesn't cut it for today's generation of Z, millennials, and like Generation C, which I'm calling Generation COVID. Yeah.
Wow. I wouldn't want to be part of that generation. I mean, I was mad when they gave us Gen X. I mean, I was like, how am I an X, an unknown entity? Like, before it was the greatest generation and I was X. Your language, your push on language use is important. And I don't think we have found something, though, to replace school choice. Because I agree with you that school choice is the wrong language, and it gives our opponents all kinds of reason to run with it and beat us up on it. But I don't think we found the right language. I am trying to just think of a way that we make parents sovereign, right? That we just say, I don't care what your policy is. I had these kids. Schools don't have kids. States don't have kids. Cities don't have kids. Bernie's voters don't have kids. I have kids.
I love that.
And I am sovereign. I am the president of their education. And the number one problem I think we have in school choice is not politics. The number one problem I think we have is busybodies in America who believe that whatever they want for their family is what everybody should have, right? So when people say stuff like, why would you want to go off and do some other school instead of just supporting our main system?
Right. Why are you online? What are you doing online?
What are you doing online? Why do you want to go to charter school? Why would you prefer to go to a Catholic school? Why would you want to go to a Muslim school? Why would you want to go to a Jewish day school? Why would you want to do a school that I don't want to do? Why wouldn't you just put all your money in my thing that I want? And this is where public education becomes a cult, like a religious cult, and their schools become little temples, right? And you become a heretic the moment that you say, I'm no longer with your religion, your American public education religion. That's harder to beat than just a disagreement on policy. How do we win the battle of making the parent sovereign, shifting the debate from what type of school you should go to and what type of system we should support to just putting it on, listen, you don't have to like what I do with my kids, but you do have to stand out of my way when I do it.
And you're right. It's not policy. It's actually ideology. And it starts really young. I mean, obviously, I saw Erica Sanzi asking about how you sell it. I mean, obviously there's tactics, but I think it really does. So I think, again, there's a yin and a yang. The one thing that I've subscribed to is if you create it, if you build it, they will come, they will learn. Right? Because again, I can go back to that analogy. Let's educate 50 million people and let them know this. Because the minute your child's born, like I have a son and a daughter-in-law that just had a baby. And
I've seen the pictures too. If anybody's not on Facebook, very cute baby.
Cute, and they're adorable. And it's like they're not even 4 weeks old. And if I said to them now, this couple, this is your child, you need to create the education opportunity you want for the rest of your life, it would be hard to take away. We don't do that because right now, people like them, if they didn't belong to me, would be, and they themselves have been educators in choice schools. But people like that would be going, what school are we going to at 3 and 4? Because the school is going to tell us what our kids need. So I think there's a transformational opportunity here. And I think the word is opportunity to help parents understand that those schools may or may not be what works for them. But right now, anytime between now and then, or even after, you need to be you are the president of your home. And that is a shift in not just language, Chris. I think it's a shift in how we talk to parents themselves. And I don't think we do that enough. But I do also always come back to tactics. Are you creating the opportunity for them to begin to say, oh, wait, I've got so many choices. Like if you look at Washington, D.C., it's almost 50%. Now there's people moving into Washington, D.C., all these bougie people who are like, again, like who vote for the people who are against the choices, but they're there because they're like, oh, I can go to Two Rivers Charter School, or I can go to Watkins Elementary, or I can go to this private school. Look at all we have, honey. Let's go pay $2 million for a home. Right? I mean, it's ridiculous. But the point is, which is kind of really unfair, but the point is they're doing this now because they have those 3 options. They weren't doing that before. They didn't want to go anywhere near Washington, D.C. 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so if we create it, they'll come at the same time. If you understand when you're having those children that this is within your reach, and talking to people about K-12 education doesn't do it, because then that tells people we're not talking about babies. We talk too much about K-12. K-12 is simply a structural description. We should be talking about education, period, and opportunity. And not, again, just talking about it, but writing about it and speaking about it and going to the churches and the civic groups, the ones that still exist, and stop with the kind of public policy, we're education choice, school choice people, and really start saying we're actually really education children people.
Yeah, I'm just parenting. I'm a parenting person. I'm a parent activist. So like, I just really want the power to shift to me, and I want other people to shut up about what I should do with my kids, right? Like, I get that you believe in your district traditional schools. I get that you believe that it's the cornerstone of democracy and it's the middle of everything that we're about. I get that you're completely ignorant about the history of public education and that you have very little knowledge about how the public education system was forced on parents and the American public that didn't want it the way that we have it right now, and that you have been brainwashed over successive generations to believe that it's the church of public education, and anyone who wants to step away from it is somehow a heretic. But that's your problem. That's not really mine, right? Like, so why do I have to live your problem? If you want to fully fund the system that you want, tell all your people to put their kids in the worst performing school in their city.
Right.
And then we'll start there, right? Tell your politicians, your teachers unions, your teachers, your educators, your middle-class people, your Bernie voters, tell them all before you preach, go put your kid in the worst performing school near you.
Tell me.
And then we'll talk about it, right?
Yeah. Then convince me.
Then convince me, because
but then what they come back and say, you're so right, but then what they come back and say, and even kind of choice-friendly legislators say this too, yeah, I really want to do that. I really like the idea. But, the districts have certain contracts they have to pay for. So it's just not that easy. Or I like the Kentucky legislator who said to me, and I'm going to do a really bad Southern accent. She was like,
don't do it.
I have running water, and you want me to have school choice, right?
Yeah, wow.
My argument to her, as it was to this Moneybags legislator who said, I love the idea. Don't worry, Jeannie. I just can't do it for those poor kids in South Carolina because there's this school board thing we have, was the same for both of them. You've never done it. You've never figured out how that money moves. And if you don't have running water, then what kind of money you're paying for your schools? Maybe you should give those parents a chance to actually say, here's how I want to educate my children, right? You're assuming we need to keep this system because there's nobody else who knows how to spend money. So where's that money right now? How's that being spent right now? Right? What is this like? So look at these district systems. People think that districts are the education experts. Districts are bureaucracy in a good, I mean, just an objective term. They were created to manage the flow of money between federal, state, and local people. They were created to manage rules. So they're not an excuse for not giving parents sovereignty.
Well, what do you say when people say at least by going through a district, they're under the management and oversight of a school board that can make sure everything's happening fairly? So when you just leave it open to like some, I don't know what you would call it, some market or something like that, that lots of bad actors can enter and do lots of bad things and families will encounter problems. What would you say to that person who says that?
School boards are markets. That's what I think is really funny. I want to run for school board right now. What do? I market myself. I get chosen by people. I'm like a product. I'm going to go to the store and try to buy paper towels today. Why am I going to Whole Foods or Giant to try to get paper towels or going on Amazon? School boards are a market which 9 to 10% of people actually put in place. So it's not really a fair market. Right. And so the people sitting on school boards, God bless them, it is hard work because they can't make any change. Most of them have zero impact on policy. But we tend to think a school board person who runs for school board becomes an expert because they ran for school board and won. And they spent a lot of time with district people telling them how things are. They're really simply supposedly representatives of our voice, but it turns out they have no control over changes. So we can throw them out, right? Sort of, maybe, but you really can't be thrown out if the only people who support you when you go to run for school board have money and their unions. And then the people that you begin to hang around with look and act like you, right? This is the criticism of the Bernie voters. We all act the same, therefore we need tremendous diversity in our world. And that's great. And we love diversity, but there's an assumption that school board people don't think the way they think because they're hanging around all the people that are thinking the same way. So I think they're a market. Our market is parents. So parent market any day over a bunch of people who have to listen and implement rules and regulations that were created outside of Chris Stewart's home, who knows his children best.
And whatever I want for my kids, everybody should have for their kids. The thing about school board elections that people are never serious about or never honest about is that typically they happen in low voter turnout elections. Yeah, they tend to stagger them off cycle so that they are lower voter turnout. It's abysmal. I think it's something like 8% voter turnout or something like that for school board elections. They're mostly overrun and overflooded with union money because they hire their bosses to negotiate their own contracts. It's a complete racket. It's more racketeering than you'll see anywhere in politics. But here's my cynicism coming out. You hear it. So let me ask you, maybe you'll correct my cynicism. Maybe you'll join me, but you are more precise about tactically how we need to play, how we need to move in the world. There once was bipartisanship. There isn't anymore. Is it anymore? Is it more nuanced than what I'm about to say? You can't win with the new wave of Democratic politicians on something like school choice because of their overtime, their devotion to teachers' unions as their dominant advisor on education policy. You'll never win. So you can talk to the poorest legislator, the richest one, whoever, but they're going to take their tune from the teachers union. Am I too cynical when I believe that, or what?
Yeah, no, I'm so happy you asked me that. You are, and I'm so glad to be able to tell you you're wrong on that.
Am I wrong about it? That's what you're saying? Yeah. Okay, good.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong about the conditions right now. Where I'm hopeful is when all this stuff was first starting, we didn't have nearly as many of you, right? We didn't have nearly as many parents and leaders of color from state to state and community to community that we've seen march recently at the conventions. They're doing great podcasts. It's 8 Black Hands. It's you. It's all these other people. And so there's a bigger group of people who can tackle so that the numbers of people in power have declined. The numbers of education reporters have declined, frankly. The number of advocates who represent this piece of this thought part are more plentiful than ever before. We're just not connecting the dots between they and the actors, because this is where the movement has fallen down, because we think somebody else is doing the work. We think there's a XYZ group in South Carolina will tell us when they need us. XYZ national group will tell us when we need us. We got too freaking organized and structured. So a lot of people who are working on the ground are waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And so many of them are beginning to put, put this back, put their work, their hands on this themselves. They're beginning to say, no, I'm not going to let that happen anymore. I'm going to create the Powerful Parent Network. I'm going to create Save Charters. I'm going to create, parents for online options. And they're doing it themselves. We have to give them lots of room and lots of space. And so, I see, Jill Biden can do an op-ed on CNN about teachers unions, and Joe Biden can say, if I'm, president, I'm going to get rid of Betsy DeVos, like, of course she would. She doesn't serve at your pleasure. Or I'm going to get rid of charter schools. But Bill Clinton became charter friendly because people in his administration became charter friendly, because a lot of people on the outside were talking to them.
Yeah, so let's explore that. So Bill Clinton, early adopter, I believe he was a person who was carrying around charter schools, the proposal before it was law in Minnesota, in his bag. Apparently, that's the legend I'm told, is that he was, there was this guy down in Arkansas who was like sharing this proposal everywhere he went. And then his wife runs for president in 2016, and the national teachers unions get her to start walking back her previous support. 4 years later, that wasn't just walking back. Now we have a guy who spent 8 years in the Obama administration supporting school reform, choice, change, all those things, charter schools. And now he's running for president. And you just mentioned it. His wife is running an op-ed with the two national teachers unions. He's come out like everybody else and said, I don't know exactly what he said about charter schools. It's not as far as Bernie goes, but it is along those lines. It's further than what Hillary did, and it's closer to what Bernie is doing. And to me, it's a little jarring that now the unions have taken over the party in a way. You say there's still hope, but I just point that out as a national example where it makes me lose hope.
Look, I always tell people, and this isn't a partisan statement, and we've written voter guides year after year. I tell people, because I'm a one trick pony. I'm a one issue voter. If you're not going to support what I support, I don't care what you think on most other things. You're not my person. If we're really serious, that's what we have to do. And right holder knows a lot of times, right? But that's not what we're willing to do. So if this guy wins, if Joe Biden wins the presidency, right, we can't be like, oh, I'm going to go see them, the education secretary. I knew him. He was a TFA person. This is what ends up happening. Oh, I like them. They're going to work with us. No, it's got to be all out war.
I love the way you're talking. Jeanne Allen is giving it to us in the morning. I love this. You need to have a radio show in the morning where you just get us all hyped in the morning. It's all out war. Yeah. Wow. I don't know that everybody is as ready for that, though, because people do want to find the common ground. They want to be loved by their enemy. You just said something. I've told people that I'm an education voter, and it's the thing I spend all my days thinking about. It's, when I think about 400 years of what will break the cycle of oppression for African Americans, for instance, I have to steep myself in African American history. I love everybody else's history and think about everybody else, but we're not free as a people yet. We have not made it to the economic mainstream in the United States. There are things that we need to do. And to me, they begin and end with our preparation for life, which happens when we're children, right? And our children. So that to me is the biggest cause we can think of. But when I say I'm an education voter, people think it's way too narrow. Like, Chris, you got to be kidding. There's all these other issues. Why would you just there are other issues? And I think those are people who have their kids in safe harbor. They have their kids in good schools. So now they have the luxury to talk about everything else. But let me challenge you on this. Would you vote for a candidate that was, now I don't know all your politics, so I'm making an assumption here. So just, you'll understand where I'm going with it. But a candidate who was absolutely right on school choice, but was wrong on abortion, are wrong on something else that was very meaningful to you, would you still be an education voter?
Um, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
would? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I would. And I have to say that typically, I think that it's because we have more opportunity, particularly at a state level, right? National is a little harder, but particularly at a state level, because education is a pocketbook issue and education can drive other issues. We can't have a healthy debate on healthcare because people can't even speak about how it's done. Like, we don't even have, like, to me, education isn't just the schools, it's how you carry on a conversation and learn. I have friends who are doctors, and I don't sit there and tell them how to do their job, but I get a lot of people telling me how schools are run that have never actually studied policy. So why is that? Is that because I'm better educated? I think it's because education has opened my mind, and I can hear and think somebody knows more than me maybe on medical stuff, but I want to understand what's going on so I can be active. Education is a brain massager, if you will. It's a stretcher. It's not just math and reading. And if you stretch people's minds, they can engage in those issues. They can compel and convince and advocate. And so I think education can help me drive the other issues that I do believe in. And I need other people around me to help. And a lot of those people are in poverty or in inequitable situations, and they can't weigh in, right? And so it shouldn't be that a lot of people who are dying in the community right now behind me, which is in Washington, D.C., are poor, and they had to show up and work at Giant, right?
I actually love that way of thinking about it. You know, that the education part drives so many of the other issues, that if you're going all the way upstream and getting to a much better place for advocacy,
right?
Because it affects so much. And I think we're living, oh God, this is going to sound so terrible. And this is what I do. I say terrible things, but I think we are living the consequences of an uneducated public. And I think thinking people have lost the battle to the morons. And I think it's going to require some sort of movement for thinking people once again to recover the country and take back over, and not in some elitist way. Because as this comes out my mouth, I know it sounds elitist, and I actually don't care, because we've so lost this battle, and it's so damaging to our institutions, and it's so damaging to our rights and our freedoms as a people.
Right.
And it makes our public so exploitable, that we have to win this thinking battle. And education is where I think you win that battle, because you educate folks. Let me get back to something less less abstract and something specific. So you mentioned Betsy DeVos, who you said doesn't serve at the service of I can't remember who it was you were saying, but we're almost at the end of 4 years of Trump. And when we were in the first year of it, there was this thought of, I can remember conversations that were like, progressives in the ed reform movement, it's time for you guys to sit down and shut up. We got this, right? And the thinking back then was that vouchers were going to fall from the sky like manna. And we were all going to be going to free schools, and we were all going to be free by now and whatnot. What happened?
Yeah, great question. Two things. One is the administration and Betsy herself lost credibility early on, even among people on her side. When she got her sea legs back, which I think she did, I think she's, considering you've got someone who's never spent a day in policy but has been advocating. I think she's represented the interest of kids and teachers really, really well. And for those of you out there like, oh my God, but she's awful and she's better. I mean, listen, try joining any administration in Washington and try and do that work. I mean, this is somebody who's actually devoted a lot of time to it. So people say, oh, you're a defender. No, just it's objective. Arnie Duncan didn't have to do it either, by the way. Right? So whatever. But they waited too late. I mean, my big criticism of this administration and the education secretary is to wait to do that tax credit program after you've lost the House. Because, and we kept saying, why? Like, lots of us were pushing. Lots of us were talking to legislators. We were talking to like fairly, progressive legislators that are like, God, if you give me an apprenticeship and an education choice program, I could see the union people in my district wanting that, right? And then they lost the House. And so they lost the House. They lost the potential to control their own party, right? That's how politics works. Nancy Pelosi would be no different. If she had a choice program, it would go because she controls her people. They waited because the administration was waiting for the education secretary. The education secretary was waiting for the right moment. No one wanted to upstage the I mean, there was like 10 different reasons and people were doing this. So then they go, okay, now we are going to introduce it after they've lost any opportunity to get anyone in the House and the Senate's rocky. The House was always going to be their better.
It doesn't feel like they came right out of the gate ready to go and just pushed it through and got it done. Because to be very honest with you, as bad as I felt about everything else that was coming our way, which I predicted would not be good for us in terms of our institutions and whatever, this was something that I thought would get delivered, like parental freedom in education was something I thought. But what I didn't expect was for there to be an argument on the right about it.
Right.
I thought the right would be pretty lockstep with each other. So I got an education in the disagreements within like the libertarians and the Republicans and, the different types of the right.
Yeah. And that's the other piece of it is that the states did not have people. They were not pushing because they were part of that. Well, we're okay. We've got a program itself, or who's going to tell us what to do? I made it very clear. And I am one of those people that, look, I'm a limited government person. I studied political philosophy. I don't believe in big government. I actually believe that individual freedom drives change. And I said, I don't care. I think they should tell every state, here's the money, you use it on school choice. If you choose not to, then you make an argument. But everyone gets the money equally. It goes to people equally, kind of like the charter incentive program. I was totally a top-down person on that because the ends justify the means.
So you don't see it as federal overreach.
You know what? We're getting federal overreach in every corner of our rooms right now as we speak. I think this kind of like, oh my gosh, it's going to take over. Look, I cut my teeth, as some people know, at the Heritage Foundation. All right.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Oh, yeah. I spent 4 years at the Heritage Foundation learning education policy and then got out because I was like, wait, there's a whole bunch of people who aren't on this side that agree and want to do something. And that's why I started CER. That's the long and short of it. And so when I hear Heritage, and those people are fantastic, good people, just like, a lot of people at Brookings are. But when I hear Heritage be like, oh my God, it was federal overreach, they're already in your pockets. And the way to keep them out is advocacy. And so you don't have to take the money. But there are an awful lot of kids out there that are suffering because we sit around and walk around and go, federal overreach, and then everything topples.
It feels like you're doing something very well that I think we can all learn from, but I don't think it's easy to learn, to be very honest with you, which is being practical, understanding that politics has a lot of pragmatism in it. And you have to ask yourself, what I was asked when I was running for office all the time privately by my campaign manager, Chris, do you want to be right or do you want to win? Because those aren't always the same two things. And you just walk around saying what you believe all the time makes you a very unruly candidate. And I don't like working for you if you're going to do that, right? What's that?
Lost?
No, I won. This was for the school board. Okay. Yeah. And I won because SEIU ran my campaign, if I'm like being very honest about it. But that, do you want to be right or do you want to win? On the right, when I just talked about this disagreement, there are those of us that have a utopian view of how things should be, like the principles that we hold they should be, and it stops us from acting on the way they actually are. Or there might be some middle ground before we get to utopia that we might have to do some other stuff. And I think you just won that in what you just said. You just won that discussion. I didn't know where to land on that, though, right?
Right.
Like if you're a limited government person and this federal program comes up, it's a test of your values in some ways. And what I hear you saying is be realistic about where you are and the way things actually are.
And how government works.
How government works, yeah.
Because government works in very different ways depending on who's managing it, depending on citizens, depending on what you allow, depending on your willingness, right? And so a really stupid, wonky technical example is a state that has a charter school law that's incredibly progressive and liberal, which is a good thing in chartering. strong law without tons and tons of strings, and a state education person wakes up one day and decides to start tying strings and no one speaks out, that's an example of a citizen falling down the job, not government just being bad in of itself. Law didn't say this, but this happens all the time. So we always point out, like, hey, you weren't allowed to do that. Did you know you weren't allowed to do that? And the citizens go, oh, we didn't know you weren't allowed to do that. Nobody told us that, right? That happens all the time. And so what you learn from history and from, sort of what we have as a nation in this country, this goes back to education, it's why I'm a big fan of civics, is it takes two to tango. It takes citizens to drive the change. And so if a law comes down and says you have to spend the money this way or else, then you and me and Tilly and a million other people out there should be like, we're going to make sure we spend the money for kids. And you're not going to get in our way, and you're not going to have a federal overreach. And that's what your job becomes.
So what's your and we're running close to end here, but what's your silver bullet for us? I know silver bullets are only good for werewolves, but I mean, you have Tilly, you have me, you have the powerful parent network and 8 Black Hands. Disparate groups of people are starting to see the same thing, but I don't know that we've all found the common ground with each other yet. But I have become very clear within the last year and a half, 2 years, that if we want to charge the hill, plant the flag, and win the war, there's no path to that without each other. There's no path without us having a diverse coalition of folks that go up. And then what? What's the strategy? Like, what do you think is the thing that will help us not just win a little battle here or there, or a state law here or there, but kind of win more of the big battle?
I think we have to focus on that money, and again, it's a hard one, and it results in lots of different tactics. But money has to follow kids. We've got to educate and make the argument that money moves with children. They move with them if they want to be digitally teaching. They move with them either it's a hybrid of like what you've talked about. It's about whatever it is. If we don't let people understand that money is driving this, money is making the powerful powerful. Right. And so money is what we have to focus on. And I'd say the other strategy is all those disparate groups that haven't figured out how to work wrong together. Right. Forget about what approach you like. Forget about, I think if you say this, it's going to make me look bad. Or I don't like the fact that you talk too much about my effort because I want to be talking about my effort. I mean, please, people, right? You may not like me. I might not like you. I don't actually dislike anybody. I'm always really concerned. Like, you don't know me. But like, how do you just go, okay, we're on the same page. Let's move. And you sit down and you say, I maybe don't like your style, but I'm just going to shush for now because I need you in this fight. And so on one hand, it has to be, this is what we agree on. And it doesn't matter if I lose a donor because the donor doesn't agree on that, right? That's the other part. And we just have to make more people powerful to have that kind of discussion. And just relentless. And it's a drip, drip, drip constantly on shows like this, in your op-eds, in your Twitter tweets, which you do so amazingly, in your podcast. It's unbelievable. And then they'll multiply because there's a million people looking at you right now going, I want to be like him. And we have to give them the pathway to be like you.
To do it.
I
love it. It's always so clear with you, so practical. And this is what I really want out of more people. Clear your throat. Stop looking for the damn common ground. Realize that there are people that don't want you to exist and operate politically as if that's the case. There are people who are not looking to be your friend. And I've said this before, it's got me in trouble, that our opponents have ISIS-like clarity about who their enemies are. Absolutely. They're not sitting around saying like, I wonder if seniority is something we should keep doing or not. They're not doing that, right? Only we are doing that on our side. So you can see behind me, I've got my library. So Jeanne, what would you add to my library? Give me the one book that you think, if I wanted to be a very good advocate for school choice, what's the book I should put on my shelf back there?
I got to tell you something, and I'm not doing this to be self-serving, but several years ago, we did a transcript from our 20th anniversary at the Center for Education Reform, and it's called Education Reform Before It Was Cool. And it's a history book. And it's basically people telling the story, from T. Willard Fair in Miami to Howard Fuller to Kevin Shavis to Linda Brown in Massachusetts. It is what we did to succeed. And I think everybody needs, you don't know this stuff, but everybody needs to read it. Because when I even watched these people speaking, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot how incredibly ecumenical and diverse and different everybody was. And if you don't know that, you don't have a pathway. And so to me, that's at least a partial roadmap. It's not everything, but education reform before it was cool. It's probably on Amazon. If not, we probably have copies. I don't know.
Great. Well, I thank you for coming on today. I will issue a challenge to you. I think your voice is very important, and the way that you say things is actually good. And I think you need a bigger platform. You have a huge platform already, but I think you need a podcast. And with all the people that you know in your network that would make for very interesting conversations, I actually believe you should really start a weekly podcast.
All right. I'll take that challenge, Chris.
You should do it. And you know so many people that would demystify this for the public that I think it would be amazing. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Really grateful. Thanks, Chris.
I appreciate you. And thanks to everybody who gave comments. And I'll see you guys on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you.